We've got lots of questions coming in, but that doesn't preclude everyone or anyone putting their hand up and asking questions from the floor. So there will be some microphones coming around. I'll start off with one of the questions that's a lot of people seem to have joined in with, and it's a sort of slightly off-the-wall one, but it's relevant, I think. So during if we do have a pre-purchase clinic or someone comes in and asks for advice, do you think it's appropriate to actually say, well, no, I don't think you should be getting that pet?
I guess in many cases, that's the answer that we wish they had for one reason or another because of the situation they and we find ourselves in later. But I also think we need to be realistic in our expectation of what a pre-purchase consultation can achieve. So because I personally haven't met many of the 15% who are currently doing this, I'm not sure what the real world experience is, but one practice in Australia took it up as an idea and started to offer them. And the vet that I spoke to there said that often she would try to discourage certain types of acquisition, for example, brachycephalic pets, and then 2 weeks later they'd appear with a brachycephalic puppy. However, they'd taken on pet insurance, which they said we just hadn't thought to do that if we hadn't had that conversation with you 2 weeks ago. So we might prefer that they hadn't acquired the brachycephalic puppy, but if they do something different and better than they might have done otherwise, then I think that can only be a positive thing.
Stephanie, do you want to...
I think I would agree with Sean. I think it's very hard, isn't it? If somebody comes along and they're absolutely determined, as I just said in my talk, if somebody comes along and they've absolutely decided 100% that they want to get a pug for whatever reason, standing there and saying, well, I don't think you should, or whatever it may be, actually is almost certainly not going to help at all. All that will happen is you'll alienate them. They'll walk away from the practice. It makes so much more sense to work with them, to accept that for whatever reason they've decided they want this pug, and actually to help them to do their very best to get the healthiest, if it is possible anyway, get the healthiest pug that you possibly can and to get it insured so that then, should it develop, sadly, all those complications that we know they can, at least we have the opportunity to then help to keep it the healthiest we can. I think turning around and saying, no, you should not get X pet, it just alienates people. They just walk away. You have to work with people, absolutely. If we sit there being dictatorial, they're just not going to come to us. So.
I'm going to take another question from Slido, then I'm going to come to the lady there next. But the next question was, should vets be taking much more of a proactive role in developing pre-purchase clinics, and do you think they've actually got the time and capacity to do so?
I think there are ways of reorganising your practice working day, and I think I'm a great, as many people who know me will know, I'm a very big fan of veterinary nurses and using veterinary nurses effectively within practice. And I think pre-purchase consultations are things that veterinary nurses would do incredibly well. The difficulty is, does your practice physically have space? That's the difficulty. The practice where I work, we only have 2 consulting rooms, so providing physical time for a nurse to be in a consulting room for several hours to do pre-purchase consultations would be very difficult. But other practices, have potentially increased space. Maybe there are ways of even doing them in the evenings. I think actually it is a really good thing, and I think we need to try to engage the public. We actually need to make them see that we're prepared to work with them, that we're prepared to help them, that we're not all about standing there saying you must do this or mustn't do this. If we can engage them and encourage them to come to us, it becomes such a positive thing. And I think long term, it's really good for our businesses. So absolutely, I think we should.
Go on, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say I think both Steph and I have sought to propose commercial benefits to practices, private practices that are offering these services. There's nothing problematic about that if they're an additional way of generating revenue. I guess I'd be quite interested, are they a meaningful way of generating additional revenue? It would seem that a large corporate practice group wouldn't continue to do this as well. Why would any private practice, if they weren't generating revenue for the practice? But I think we could take them as a barometer that they'll soon stop offering them if they're either costing the practice money or are cost neutral, unless it's part of corporate social responsibility and somehow the animal welfare benefits are sufficient.
Yeah. Right, yes.
I think we need a paradigm shift here, because I've been developing a community outreach, person-centred, human-animal bond practitioner approach in Suffolk. And we are catching people in the community who are not pet owners, who are not registered with vets, and we're getting them we're a conduit back into the veterinary profession. And the evidence is there. I've done 800 cases, and I can tell you that it is a no-brainer. And what happens, bizarrely, is that vets refer cases to us. We then help source an animal which is lifestyle appropriate and pass them back to the vets. There is a huge need for this, but it is actually you catch the people in the community. And then so if the vets would consider doing community outreach with veterinary nurses, and I would bring into that volunteers, because we don't as a profession engage our clients as volunteer ambassadors and support for our clients that are not in the clinic or haven't registered. So there is huge evidence in my mind that this is an absolute win-win-win.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Yes.
I'll just say for me, Pete, that would certainly chime with PDSA's experience. So we have some community and education veterinary nurses, at least one of them is in the room, and they are able to offer services like this out in the community and get a good response when they do.
Steph, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, sending the veterinary nurses out, you have to engage with the community, because people who don't already have pets, as Sean's story told, they walk past veterinary surgeries. Why would you go to a veterinary surgery? We have to change people's attitudes to vets, and we have to change our attitudes to how we engage with potential clients that are of the future.
Thank you. There's a couple of sort of hands up for on the Slido for a question about the point of sale and whether there should be more pressure on businesses to reflect on the animal welfare issues related to the animals they're selling rather than a quick profit.
Yeah, so I hinted at the potential role of legislation and the UK animal establishment licensing regulations coming in October, and one of the new requirements that will introduce is mandatory training of pet retail staff so that they understand the 5 welfare needs and evidence-based pet care and have some basic training, and that mandatory point-of-sale written information is provided to people, which it isn't necessarily currently when they buy a pet. So I didn't dwell on it because it's not quite pre-purchase in the way that we're talking about pre-purchase, i.e. the step before that, which pet's likely to be right for me, but at least at the point of sale. Not to riddle this session with anecdotes, but I used to work in a pet shop, and I and the other teenage lads were dishing out pets left, right and centre without any training. So at least that should be meaningfully tackled later this year.
I think I'll just leave it to Sean.
Yeah, I think this sort of reflects on the current animal welfare legislation, which actually places a sort of a pre-purchase burden on the purchaser, actually, but very few cases have actually taken that forward. We've got an interesting one about information, and quite a lot of people have put the thumbs up to this, about the challenge of what the breeder might tell the prospective purchaser in terms of, I suspect, perhaps incorrect information, or that this pet will be just right for you. And any thoughts about educating or getting breeders involved in long-term care aspects?
I think it's hard, isn't it? Breeders can be a bit of a law unto themselves. But I think, I think as a profession, if we can work with breeders again, but it would be nice to maybe see perhaps breeding maybe being a little bit better regulated, possibly, because at the moment, obviously we have puppy farms, that type of thing. That's very difficult, isn't it? How do we regulate those types of situations? If we can engage with really good breeders and try to encourage good breeders, but unfortunately there will still be people who will, walk past a pet shop and buy a dog from a pet shop. So absolutely engaging with breeders is a really good thing, but I don't think it'll get all of them. That's the difficulty.
I mentioned in the second part, the second half of the Which Pet consultation, we would talk about the 5 welfare needs and a conversation about sourcing. And certainly for dogs, one of the resources that we would signpost to at that stage is the puppy contract and the puppy information pack. Hopefully that helps to drive an informed consumer who has that in their hand and is able to go to a breeder or retailer of any shade and be empowered to ask the right questions so that they have a good chance of identifying those who aren't so ethical or responsible.
Thank you. Well, we have got quite a few more questions, so I think we probably should start to draw this session to a close. I'd just like to perhaps ask Sean and Stephanie to think about, are there barriers to rolling out a more engaged and pre-purchase approach that we might think would be tackleable, if you like?
The number one that springs to mind for me, again based on anecdotes of speaking to those who have tried it, is cultural. So they have put the sign up and they've said no one came. But there's probably a bit of chicken and egg there. So it goes back to seeing how the practice groups and others get on. And by all accounts, it's going well so far for them. So it seems to me that we probably have to persist. It's probably not even just a case of putting our sign on the door and saying, please come and speak to us first. It's expecting that won't lead to a deluge at the start, but that hopefully if benefits accrue to us and them and we keep going, then eventually we'll get a new cultural norm.
Yeah, I think I don't have a lot to add to that. I think very much the same. Yeah, got to be changing. I think we have to change the perception. What do clients think vets are? Maybe BVA should do that. You know, actually change the perception of what the profession is actually for. We're not just there to provide A&E and health services when you have an animal. We're lovely people you can come and talk to. We're not going to be critical. We're not going to be judgmental. We're going to understand. We're going to be kind. We're going to be nice. Come and talk to us. And actually, we're not going to charge you a fortune either for that type of advice. If we can change that, then perhaps we become the people they talk to rather than the pet shop or the breeder.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. That's a perfect way to wrap up the session. So thank you very much, Sean and Steph. Thank you to all our speakers this afternoon.